Hear from Serah Blain, who is the Executive Director of the Secular Coalition for Arizona. Serah is a student at Prescott College, where she is co-chair of the Secular Student Alliance at Prescott. She is also a member of the Board of Directors of the Prescott Pride Center. She currently lives in Flagstaff, Arizona, but her home is in St. Paul, Minnesota, right in humanism land. Please welcome Serah Blain.
Good evening, humanists. Thank you for still being awake. I won't be offended if you drift off, though. It's late, and I know a lot of you guys are from the East Coast. I have to tell you, it's really great to be at the UU Social Justice GA. It really feels, in a lot of ways, like a homecoming for me, because my interest and passion for secularism was really born out of my participation in First UU Baltimore's social justice work, and I got involved in political advocacy with that congregation. Specifically, we partnered with Equality Maryland to do lobbying on marriage equality. Through that experience, I ultimately had what ended up being a watershed moment for me. So we were meeting with a Democratic legislator. She was a Catholic, and she was an advocate on social justice issues on most of the progressive issues that we cared about. I mean, she advocated for women's rights, she advocated for LGBT employment protection, public education. She even considered civil unions. But when it came to marriage equality, she kept saying, my faith will not allow me to take that step. I just believe that God sanctioned marriage to be between a man and a woman. And that was a conversation stopper. There's no way to have a conversation with someone about what's actually good for people if they're rejecting the language of reason for what a particular faith group or person thinks God says. So here I was lobbying with one religious group that deeply believes that the marriages of LGBT people are as valid and valuable as the marriages of heterosexual people. And we had our representative essentially saying that her religious beliefs about marriage trumped ours. And that was the moment that I realized if we were going to have any movement on the marriage issue or the myriad other human rights issues that religious arguments suppress, we were going to have to get religion out of government. We were going to have to make legislators understand that good policy, the kind of policy that protects human rights and social justice, requires the tools of fairness and compassion and a commitment to liberty for all, regardless of religious belief or non-belief. And so those of us who are committed to social and economic justice have to be committed to secularism, because the kinds of policies that enable people to flourish, that bring people from the margins of society into a place of opportunity, these kinds of policies are under full assault by the religious right in America today. Policies, for example, that give women the right to make their own choices about the size of their families. Policies that give people in same-gendered marriages the same socially and economically stabilizing benefits that people in heterosexual marriages receive. Policies that ensure that all children have access to fact-based secular public education and sex education. We've lost a lot of ground on these issues in Arizona and across the country this year in particular. We have a serious problem in our country where people, particularly women and particularly poor women, have become pawns in a religious war against reproductive choice, against public education, and against equality. Led by the religious right, through conservative Christian advocacy organizations like Focus on the Family's Family Policy Councils in Arizona, it's the Center for Arizona Policy, our elected officials have passed bill after bill after bill putting into law their own religious beliefs about morality and social policy, effectively making the rights of all of us dependent on the religious beliefs of people in power. And they're calling that religious liberty, but it's religious tyranny, and it's wrong. Now, I've heard our lawmakers defending the religious right on the floor of the House and the Senate, and they say that this conservative faction represents religious Americans, and that the values of the religious right reflect the values of the people in this country. I believe that's a lie. The religious right doesn't represent religious Americans. They do not represent Unitarian Universalists who affirm the worth and dignity of every person, as well as the goal of a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and thus affirm access to family planning, reproductive health care, including birth control, age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education, and abortion. The religious right does not represent Episcopalians who stand in support of gay and lesbian persons and in opposition to any state or federal constitutional amendments that prohibit same-sex marriages or unions. The religious right does not represent Reformed Jews who have a long-established position that the separation of church and state is best for both church and state. The religious right and the policymakers sponsoring its legislation does not represent United Methodists, whose church favor a wall of protection between church and state and argues that churches should not seek to use the authority of government to make the whole community conform to their particular moral code. The religious right does not represent evangelical Lutherans, whose social statement on reproductive health care clearly opposes preventing access to abortion or contraception by law or lack of public funding. The religious right does not represent people of faith belonging to any of the 40 religious denominations or faith organizations making up the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, including the Unitarian Universalist Association, United Church of Christ, Ethical Culture, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, Catholics for Choice, and the YWCA. The religious right doesn't represent the tens of thousands of members from over 75 faith traditions who belong to the Interfaith Alliance, which promotes legislation that safeguards the separation of church and state. And the religious right and the legislators in its pocket absolutely do not represent secular Americans who believe that all public policy, including policy around reproductive health care, marriage equality, and public education, must be based on facts and evidence and the advancement of human well-being, not on one narrow religious interpretation of truth, not on religious assumptions about human development and human sexuality, not on biblical justifications for women's oppression, and not on a principle of religious privilege. The success of the religious right's assault on social justice is possible because too many Americans have acquiesced to the idea that it is acceptable to write personal religious beliefs into public law. And not all religious beliefs support human rights, women's autonomy, or LGBT equality. Imposing religious beliefs and practice through law is an assault on real religious liberty, and it's a vehicle for lawmakers to jeopardize the equality of people they don't agree with. And so non-theists and progressive people of faith have to work together to make sure that our legislators do not use religion as a divisive weapon against politically vulnerable people, but that they use the instruments of justice and liberty and a fierce devotion to human rights. These are the pillars of secularism and the path to a freer, fairer, more joyful country for all women and men. And that's the country that Secular Coalition is fighting for. A country where religion doesn't divide us, but reason and compassion unite us. We can realize that vision in the United States of America, but we're going to have to work for it. We're going to have to get and stay organized, get engaged, get elected, put your humanist values into action, run for your school boards and your city councils, and have public conversations about the importance of secularism and social justice. We're going to have to lobby our elected officials, talk to our friends and neighbors about the seriousness of the threat the religious right poses to social and economic justice and the dangers of desecularizing our government. And we must continuously insist, again and again, that the religious beliefs of people in power must not be used as an excuse to negate the human rights of anyone in this country. Secular Coalition for Arizona, on behalf of the atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other freethinkers we represent, is going to continue to lobby for a wall of separation between church and state, for the dignity and autonomy of all women and men to be safeguarded from religious intrusion, and for religious and non-religious conviction to be given appropriate space for expression in public life. And if you live in Arizona, I'd love for you to join us. You can check out more information about us on our website at secularaz.org. If you're in another state, connect with Secular Coalition for America, secular.org, and find out what they're doing to organize a chapter in your area. Because the secularist message is desperately needed. Religion must not be the basis for public policy. The rights of women, LGBT people, religious minorities, and non-believers must be protected against narrow ideological religious beliefs of people in power. This is my cause. This is the cause of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, and I ask that all the social justice-minded people in this room make it your cause. secularaz.org, secular.org. Thank you.